Story 1. I was driving back home after visiting my dad for his birthday. It was an 8-hour drive and I had to go to work the next day, so I needed to get home in time. The weather was not good. The wind started mild, but soon turned into strong gusts that made my car shake. The rain was so loud on my car's roof that I could barely hear the radio. After 6 hours of driving, I came across a fallen tree blocking the road. There was another car that had already called for help, but I didn't have time to wait. I decided to take a smaller road as a detour. It was a rural area in Minnesota, and I thought, what could go wrong? The smaller road was in bad shape, more potholes than asphalt, but my GPS was still working fine. It showed that the detour would take 20 minutes longer. I thought it was still better than waiting for the tree to be cleared. I turned onto the detour road, which stretched long and overlooked the countryside. On one side there was a wheat field, and on the other a pine forest. It was very dark and there were no lights ahead. I kept going, leaning back in my seat. Suddenly, I saw a car parked by the side of the road. I tried to swerve, but I ended up hitting the car and cracking its taillight. I stopped my car about 20 feet away. I thought about just driving away, but I decided to leave my insurance information. I dug around in my glove compartment and found a slip of paper. I tucked it under my jacket and got out of the car. I walked over to the parked car. It was an old, dark beige sedan, probably from the 90s. I saw something odd in the car. There were at least 3 duffel bags in the back seat. I took my insurance information and slipped it under the windshield wipers, along with a $20 bill as an apology. As I was walking back to my car, I noticed someone approaching. They had a dirty shovel slung over their shoulders and were holding another duffel bag, making it 4 in total. I felt uneasy. This person had been digging something up in the middle of a rainstorm. I couldn't imagine they wanted anyone to see them doing it. I quickly got out of the rain and into the driver's seat. I put the keys in and started the engine. It made a huffing noise as if it wanted to stall, but it didn't. Then someone knocked on my window. I could have driven away, but I didn't. I turned my head and saw a stern-looking man in his early 50s. He had a thick mustache and wore a black baseball cap, looking like someone who wanted to be forgettable and neutral. He was holding a gun. He made a rolling motion with his hand and said, "Let's have a short conversation before you go running off, sir. It'll just be a couple of minutes." I rolled down the window. I realized how dangerous this situation was. We were alone on a small road during bad weather, and no one knew I was there. The man didn't look like he wanted to have a rational discussion. I said, "Sorry about the taillight. Mind lowering that pistol?" He forced a smile and said, "I would mind, yes." He reached his arm through the open window and unlocked the door. Opening it, he motioned for me to step out. I looked back at the steering wheel, unsure what to do. "Maybe I could get away if I did something sudden." He said, "I wouldn't do that. It'll get messy." "I didn't see anything," I assured him. "I'm just passing through." "I'm sure you didn't. Now step out," he insisted. Looking down the barrel of the gun, I felt I had no choice. I stepped out of the car. My mouth went dry, and I could feel the blood rushing to my head. "I don't know what you think I saw," I said. "It was just a duffel bag and a shovel. I don't even know you." "Just step right this way," he said, pointing to the side of the road. "I didn't see the license plate. Hell, I can hardly see you. It's raining too much, you know." I tried to reason with him. "Fair enough," he said. He pointed at something up in the pine woods and asked, "Can you see that?" I leaned in and looked closely. There was nothing up there, just pine trees and rain. Then I realized he was making me stand still. Before I could react, he fired the gun. Now, many stories would end here. That would make sense. Even though I barely knew the guy or what he'd done, he wasn't taking any chances. He shot me point blank in the head. I had no idea what happened next, but I figured out a few things. He pushed my car into a lake and buried me in a shallow grave just east of that road, in a field right up a hill. Writing it out like this, it seems almost detached, like it didn't really happen to me, like it happened to someone else, but I can't say it any other way. He killed me, and I didn't even understand why. It felt like blinking. One moment there was a flash and a bang, and the next, I was inhaling dirt. I almost choked right then and there. My first breath was sour and bitter with the taste of the earth. I flailed around until I felt the air touch my fingertips. Then I started to dig. I gasped for breath, but all I got was mud and grass. I kept digging, desperate to reach the surface. Finally, my face broke through the surface. I wheezed, sucking in the night air. Only then did I realize that my heart was still pounding in my chest. I was still surprised by the loud sound of the gunshot. The rain had stopped, but it was late. I was out in a field, a small clearing in the middle of a pine forest. I was surrounded by strangely colored sunflowers. They were probably white, but they looked kind of blue in the moonlight. I only had the clothes on my back. He had taken my phone, my car keys, my smartwatch, everything. He had buried me alive, I thought. But the strangest thing was that right where I had been lying, there was a cross. It was crude, made of a couple of broken 2x4s nailed together. It looked more like a plus sign. But what kind of murderer leaves their victim alive and marks their grave? That's when it hit me. He didn't leave me alive. He had shot me in the back of the head. I touched my skull from back to front, but there was nothing wrong with it, not even a bruise. Physically, I was perfectly fine, but that didn't make any sense. What had happened? How could I be okay? I had no idea where to go, so I just picked a direction and hoped for the best. It was dark, but the moonlight helped a little. Looking back at that weird clearing, I couldn't help but feel watched. It was as if those creepy sunflowers were all turning to look at me. First things first, I needed to get to the police. This man was dangerous. I had the time and a clear description in my head. The rest would work itself out. It took me about 20 minutes to make it to a road. I figured it was the same road where I had run into him, or maybe that's just what all roads look like in rural Minnesota. In 2 hours, only a single car passed me on that road, and they weren't eager to stop for hitchhikers. I could see why the guy had picked this spot. It was the middle of nowhere. That I had ended up there was just bad luck. Wrong place at the wrong time, apparently. Astronomical odds. I had been following the road for longer than I cared to admit when a couple of headlights slowed down behind me. Looking back, I saw a middle-aged woman driving a pickup. "You lost?" she called out. "Sort of," I said, turning my pockets inside out. "Robbed." "Are you okay?" she asked. "Not really." "Are you on drugs?" "I wish." She scoffed at me and leaned over, opening the passenger side door. "Get in." My eyes grew heavy the moment I sat down. I felt the heat of the car melting my bones, turning my body into butter. I almost nodded off right then and there. "Looks like you've had one hell of a night," she said. "Where you headed?" "The police, I guess," I said. "Can you call them?" "I can, but there ain't no one around till morning," she said, "unless it's urgent." "It's kind of urgent. Look, you're not on fire and no one's hurt. They're not coming out to get you till morning, that's all I'm saying." I wiped some dirt off my face and nodded. "Nearest motel, then?" "Nonsense," she smiled. "You can have my kid's room, just for the night." "Appreciate it." Her name was Mary Ann. She worked at a water treatment plant not too far away and was coming home from a night out with her work friends. As a single mother to a now grown kid, she didn't mind lending some empty nest space to a stranger in need. I felt like between Mary Ann and the man who shot me in the head, I had managed to find the two kinds of people you might run into in rural Minnesota. I got to borrow a room next to her garage for the night. I took a shower and threw my clothes in the washer. Mary Ann didn't have much food to share, but she microwaved me some leftovers. Lasagna. We talked a bit about what had happened, but I didn't have much to say. It was so hard to describe. I couldn't just babble on about how I had crawled out of a hole in the ground, so I said I had been mugged and had my car stolen at gunpoint. It was an uneasy sleep. It was like my heart wouldn't settle down, no matter how comfortable I was. I kept feeling like I was on the edge of bursting into a sprint, like there was still an immediate danger. It was like I kept hearing the click of the gun, anticipating the painful flash of the bullet burning past the hairs on my neck. The following morning, Mary Ann made breakfast. She was chatty, and making breakfast brought out the people person in her. "That road is trouble," she said, "but I guess you're not the worst thing we've found there." "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah," she continued. "Did you see the, hold on." She wiped her hands on a towel and lent me her phone. She had a social media post up about a dead man. I recognized him. It was the man, the one who shot me. There wasn't a lot to it. A small post talking about how he had been a couple of weeks from turning 71 and how he had passed suddenly in his car. There were dozens of posts talking about how much they were going to miss him and how great of a guy he had been. I figured they hadn't known much about his extracurricular activities. Good people don't shoot other good people in the head. Before I handed her the phone back, I noticed something odd. Right there, by the time. The date. 31 days had passed. I almost choked on my orange juice. This was beyond explanation. It didn't make any sense. 31 days? I handed Mary Ann her phone back. I mulled the options over in my head. I wanted to call my mum, but I couldn't remember her number. It was saved on my phone, which was gone. Besides, what would I tell her? Again, you can't just tell people you've crawled out of a hole in the ground. I figured I could do a little research, try to figure out what had happened before I went to the police. Maybe there was a logical explanation for all of this. Maybe I had just missed it. If so, a little research was a small price to pay to not sound insane. "Thanks," I said. "Do you know where this guy lived?" "You know him?" she asked. "Sort of," I said. "An acquaintance." "I mean, yeah, I can show you his place if you want." I had to know more. There were too many questions, and I needed to get some answers before I could start to understand everything. If I could figure out why this guy had shot me in the head, maybe I could go to the police with solid information. The mystery of how 31 days had passed would have to wait. Mary Ann drove me downtown. I don't remember the name of the town, but it was small, basically just a collection of houses along a somewhat busy street. In those 31 days, it had gone from late autumn to early winter, and it showed. The morning frost was just melting off the bare trees. She turned onto a small road just off the main street and drove up a hill. The house we were looking for stood out. It was the only white house with red trim. It looked like a big shed decorated like a candy cane. It was an eyesore. It was clear that no one had been there for a while. Some kids had broken the windows. A couple of trees in the yard cast long shadows across the bare dirt, highlighting the Midwestern morning sun. There was a small town smell in the air, mud, melted frost, and diesel. I thanked Mary Ann, and she handed me $50. "There's a motel just down the street," she said. "There should be a couple of rooms if you need some space." God bless that woman. As she drove away, I walked up to the front door. The lock was broken, and there were a couple of spray-painted tags on the side. The door was barely hanging onto the hinges, having been shaken by strong winds. The inside was pretty plain. The guy was clearly a loner. No pictures on the walls, no pets, and barely any decorations. A couple of polite postcards from acquaintances piled up in the hallway. Empty plates sat on the kitchen table. Checking the fridge, there was half a six-pack of beer and a jar of pickles. That's it. It was empty. If this guy was turning 71, there were no signs of a long life. In fact, there were no signs of anything. You could tell that people had been through the place. Furniture had been moved and broken. There were scratch marks on the floor where someone had tried to pry up the floorboards. There was also the smell of cigarette smoke. Maybe the guy was a chain smoker, but the place didn't smell like it had been lived in. I wandered around, not really knowing what to look for. I had this feeling that knowing why he'd tried to kill me might shed some light on things, but it really didn't. It's like the post said, he'd just tipped over and died. It was hard to accept that maybe, just maybe, I'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe I'd never know for sure. Still, the guy had it coming. Whatever the reason, you just don't kill people in cold blood. Leaving that house behind, the question remained, why me? What did I do? There was no point in thinking about it over and over in my head. I figured I'd get a room at that motel, get in touch with the police, and get back on the road. My family had to be worried sick. I felt a little bad for spending this much time running around with this nonsense, but it bothered me endlessly. You don't forget waking up in a shallow grave. You just don't. I followed Mary Ann's directions and came across a gravel path. It was a long, winding path over a hill and through the pine woods. I spotted a peculiar tree in the distance, a dead, leafless oak. I decided to stop there to rest my feet for a bit. The tree had a root that curled around itself, making it an excellent seat. I sat down to think about my options. But see, I do this thing when I'm deep in thought. I scratch something over and over with my left index finger. There's something about the sensation of running your finger over something textured that just numbs my mind. So as I sat there and considered my next move, I did just that. I scratched a bit. Right in that exact spot, something had already scratched the bark off. I pulled my finger back, sticky with sap. Someone had been sitting here just like I was. They'd been scratching that spot just like I'd done. Odd. Following the trail, I ended up next to two buildings down by the main road. There it was, the motel and a supermarket. There was a woman outside the motel smoking a cigarette. She kept looking my way, so I waved at her. "You here to pick up your stuff?" she asked. "What?" "Your stuff," she repeated. "I'll throw it away if you don't." "No, yeah, I'll get it. Sorry." I had no idea what she was talking about, but she clearly intended to talk to me. There was no mistaking it. She'd seen me before. She was very comfortable in that fact, so much so that it made me question if we had history. I joined her outside the motel and waited for her to finish her cigarette. I got a stern talking to about leaving things behind. Apparently, there was only so much space in the lost and found. I apologized, which eased the tension a bit. Maybe she was expecting some kind of entitled big city folk talk from me. She said she'd give me 20 minutes to clear out the room and handed me a key. I hurried down the hall and up the stairs. Standing outside that room, I didn't know what to expect. I'd never been there before, I'd never seen this woman. And yet, she seemed to know me, or at the very least, she'd seen me before. When I entered, I could tell someone had been living there. There were some clothes and a couple of items scattered across the nightstand. It didn't take long until a chill crawled up my spine. The clothes in that room were my size. There was a toothbrush in a green plastic case in the bathroom, just like I always keep it. I'm a bit squeamish about bacteria, which begged the question, had I been there before? I decided to do a test. If I had been there before, my phone would be tucked away and hidden near the bed. I'd had some bad experiences with staff stealing my electronics in the past, so I leaned over the bed and fumbled around for a bit. And there it was. I found my phone tucked between the wall and the bed. But more than that, I found something hidden underneath. It was a black metal box with a 4-digit code. I tried the first 4-digit code that came to mind, and voila, it opened. Inside, I found a gun, 6 bullets, a stack of about $4,100 bills, and a notebook. There was a knock at the door before I could explore further. "You finished?" the lady asked. "Sorry," I said. "It's, gonna be a while." "You staying?" "Would you mind if I did?" "You paying?" Of course. Yeah. All right then. I sat there for a moment, taking it all in. How could I have known it would be there, and how would I know the code? How could I have been in that room without remembering anything about it? It didn't make sense, but I was holding the proof in my hands. There had to be answers. I paid for a couple of days and locked myself in that room. I gathered all the clothes and checked all the corners to make sure there was nothing else hidden in there. It felt strange, like I was following in my own footsteps, but I'd never been there before. I'd woken up in that field like no time had passed. What was I missing? I kept the TV on in the background just to fill the empty space. I checked the phone. There were a couple of outgoing calls. A few of them were short, and a couple of them were a little longer. Some of them were dated from about 10 to 15 days after I was attacked. In the empty space I couldn't account for. Those were 30 days of my life that were just gone, but something had happened in between. There were a couple of texts too. Most of them were just people being worried, asking if I was okay. There were a couple of replies sent from this phone, but just a few. They were short, just saying I'm fine. But one text stood out. It was from my younger sister. "Why are they saying you're dead?" she wrote. There had been no response. Dead? I immediately tried to call her, but my phone was disconnected. Either the service was discontinued, or I hadn't paid my bills. Either way, I wasn't getting through. I decided to check the notebook. The pages were dated, starting at about 21 to 22 days after my supposed death. It mentioned waking up in a field of blue sunflowers, feeling confused and looking for help. It mentioned getting a ride to town from an old man in a blue van. Other entries mentioned talking to people about my attacker only to find out he'd already died. It seems that my first instinct was always to find the guy who killed me, and always finding out that he was gone. These notes described an experience that was almost identical to mine, waking up, getting to a motel, looking up the house of our attacker. Apparently, that's where they'd found the gun and the money. Maybe it hadn't been kids messing up the place. Maybe it was me. The notes also mentioned a letter left behind. It just said that he was sorry. The note read. There were more notes, dates, connections. So I flipped to an empty page, grabbed a pen, and tried to put it all into a clear timeline. It seems that about 10 days after getting shot in the head, I'd woken up in a field for the first time. I'd tried to find the man who did it, but he had already died more than a week before. According to the notebook, the man had died either the same night that I did or the day after. Then, on day 20, I'd woken up in a field. Again, I'd made my way back to town to find the man who killed me, but he was already dead. For the next few days, I'd been locked up in this very motel trying to figure out what was going on. I'd made numerous calls, sent texts and a couple of emails, only to be told that I'd been declared dead. Apparently, I'd walked into the police station on day 19 and fell over, dead. Complete organ failure, according to the coroner. The notes warned me about contacting friends and family, telling me I'd just cause harm and confusion. For all they knew, I was gone. Talking to them would open a lot of questions that I couldn't answer, but I wasn't dead. I was right there, reading that notebook. From all I could gather, there seemed to be a pattern. Every 10 days, I would wake up in that field as if nothing had happened. I would believe I'd just gotten killed by that man and I'd seek to either get help or revenge. But he was already dead. The world had moved on, but the notes didn't mention seeing any other versions of myself. So what exactly happened to every version? Did they all drop dead? The final entry hinted at an answer. It simply read, "I can feel my heart slowing down. I haven't been able to relax for over a week, and now it's getting hard to move. I have to pry my fingers open with my teeth. My toes have turned black. I'm seeing things. I see the one before me. I see you reading this. I know what is about to happen, and to prove it, I will put a cross on that spot. It will be the first thing you will see." The cross. The old man hadn't been the one to put that up. I had. This was the working theory. Every 10 days, I would wake up in that field. And every 9 or 10 days after that, I'd die, only for a new me to wake up, repeating the cycle. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I turned everything in that notebook inside out, looking for answers. There were a couple of notes about checking the library, talking to people about local legends, mentions of those strange sunflowers, but there were no answers. It was all dead ends and vague nonsense. I didn't know what to do. The first version of me had fumbled around, confused and scared, and died. The second version had tried to figure things out but was still gone. What could I do that those two didn't? And did this mean I was going to die in about a week? Every idea that I had was in that notebook. It was already there and it had failed. I'd checked the soil in that clearing. I'd talked to the locals. I'd researched similar myths and legends. I'd tried burying myself in that soil again, as if I could go back somehow. But no, I'd been killed and buried among those flowers, and they refused to stop bringing me back. And it did so about every 10 days. I wasted that entire day trying to piece it all together. I fell asleep somewhere around 9 in the evening, still holding that notebook. I kept falling in and out of sleep, having these uneasy thoughts. I kept imagining that first breath as I broke the surface, digging myself out of a shallow grave. The confusion, the ringing in my ears from that gunshot. But there were other things in the dark of my dreams. The sound of my feet rushing into that house, desperately digging through a home, only to find a gun and a letter, scaring off a few kids, making them drop their spray cans as they fled. Then there was the sound of people crying and screaming in my ear. Questions I couldn't answer, desperation on all ends, building into this tight knot in my chest that no comforting word could untangle. Then a lake, aching joints, a final swim as my bones fossilized and decayed. I was at peace, knowing I was about to go, and I chose to do it in a way where no one would be bothered. And now me, here, alone in a motel, trying not to hear the ticking clock, trying not to think of what happens when my 10 days are up. The next day, I sprang into action. I washed the cold sweat off my brow and decided to answer what questions remained in that notebook. I would do anything. There had to be a solution. Things always work out, one way or another. Checking recently used apps, I found out that my previous version, the second copy, had used a map. They had searched for nearby lakes. There was a lake called Frog Lake nearby, and they had just walked into it. That must have been the way they chose to end things. Out of sight, out of mind. But the biggest question remained. Why had that old man killed me in the first place? I fell into a cycle of anxiety, desperation, and failure. I tried to find his car, but it had been destroyed. I tried to find any of his relatives, but he had none. All who had posted were acquaintances and friends he had made. I messaged a couple of them using the motel Wi-Fi, but they either didn't respond or had nothing to say. I tried to check for any criminal records, but he had none. I tried to find out something about his gun, but it was unregistered and the serial number had been filed off. I couldn't even find out where he got the bullets, and why had he apologized? Why leave me money? The only thing I could think of were those duffel bags of his and his digging. There had to be a reason. The nights were getting worse. I was seeing little glimpses of things that had happened before. Crying in the motel room, running into the police station, tearing out notes from the notebook and scratching my face until it bled. Frustration, hopelessness, and desperation. And with every glimpse, every dream, I started to realize how hopeless this was. Every idea, every thought, everything I'd tried, I had already done it. I was just repeating patterns. I was in a race against myself, and nothing would change. On day 5, I went back to that glade. Retracing my steps, I found that it was surprisingly close to where he had parked his car that night. Most of the ground there was gravel and rock, but the soil in that glade was soft and easy to dig. To me, The only thing that made sense was that he had been digging for something there. The cross was still there. I couldn't stop looking at it. What had I thought when I put that up? Did I still have hope? That night, I started seeing other things. Not just things that had happened, but things that were to come, years from now. Waking up in that same glade, the cross long since aged, a small bag left by the side, a welcome package. The sunflowers would still be there. The cars would look different, quieter, cleaner. Over time, the roads would get worse, the sun would be warmer. I'd draw the same first breath thousands of times, over and over. I'd ask myself the same questions. I'd try the same things, and I'd come to the same conclusions. I forced myself awake before I went too far. I didn't want to see. I didn't want to know. The clock was ticking. On day 6, I had completely given up. I just lay there in the motel room, watching daytime TV, eating stale chips from the supermarket across the street. I took 10-minute naps and then had bursts of panic, feeling my heart race and my chest tighten. I could hear it in my mind. That ticking clock. It was almost over. Forever. I tore my hair out. I curled up in the shower until the water turned cold. But whenever I closed my eyes a little too long, I'd hear myself drawing that first breath again and again, realizing the same horrifying truth. And before I knew it, it would be over, and it would be over, and over, and over. And I'd never really know what had happened until it was too late. By the night of day 6, I might as well have been dead. I just lay there, naked, on the floor. I don't want to talk about day 7. It got worse, and I did a lot of things I wasn't proud of. So, I'm skipping ahead to day 8. On day 8, I took a walk downtown. There was a corner pub where I decided to have lunch. By chance, 2 police officers walked in. They were talking, and I couldn't help but listen. "That doesn't make any sense," one of them said. "How can the guy have his own bones in a duffel bag?" "That's the thing," the other said. "He must have had a twin. They were identical." So, all these years, there've been 2 of them, and no one knew. It's like some parent trap stuff, the officer laughed. Can you imagine? Bones. Duffel bag. There was something there. They had to be talking about him. I hurried back to the motel. My killer had been digging the night he killed me. He had left his gun and bullets in a box, telling me he was sorry, along with some money. They had found bones in his duffel bags that were identical to his own. But what if they weren't an identical twin? What if they were a copy of him? Or maybe he was the copy. I bought a shovel of my own and went back out to that glade that same day. Checking the soil where I had been buried, I dug, and I dug deep. Maybe there was a reason I'd been buried in a shallow grave. Maybe there was something else further down. I dug until my muscles ached and my lungs burned. I dug all afternoon in different places, and finally, I found something. About 5 feet deep, there was a body bag. It was covered in chemicals, but the smell was unmistakable. There was a corpse in there. I knew what I'd see before I even opened it. The zipper struggled, but it rolled open, challenging every feeling in my body. It's a strange feeling to hold your own face, to see your own closed eyes, to touch your own hair in comfort, the little quirks and scars that only you know of, except for that one thing, a bullet hole. I collapsed to my knees. I had figured it out. From a stray thought mentioned by a passerby, I figured it out. There was a reason that man had such a simple home, why he looked 50 although he was 70. He had gone through this. He had been in the cycle before me. Killing me and having me take his place in the ground must have broken the cycle. There was an end to it. That's why he apologized. That's why he just killed a random person by the side of the road. It wouldn't end until someone took his place. If not me, then someone else. So that meant that I had 2 options. I could go through this nightmare over and over, or I could end it. I could cut those who would come after me out of the cycle and spare them the horror I had felt. I could do that. Now I had options. That night, after I had washed the dirt from my hands and knees, the dreams were different. I felt myself drawing another first breath, only to wake up under a starless sky. The sun had gone dim, and the moon hung closer than ever. I could hear the earth rumbling as towering giant beings reached for the horizon sky. I'd see vaguely human shapes roam a desert wasteland, reaching towards the heavens, crying for death, crying for an end to the cycle, like me. But there would be more first breaths, ones where I would wake up in a firestorm only to burn to death, ones where I would wake up choking under solid ice, ones where I would be pulled up by inhuman scavengers only to be torn apart and eaten, farmed and cultivated like wheat. And the cycle would continue, turning life into a grotesque, broken mirror image of what I'd been told it would be. Lies and hopes made real by church, state and peers. This was real life, uncompromising, uncaring, raw. And then there would be no air, then there would be no soil, there would be black. An impossible cold would snap across my crystallizing skin. My eyes would be open, but there would be nothing to see. No sound to hear but the popping of my eardrums. I'd failed to draw that first breath of air once every 10 days. I woke up screaming on the 9th day. I had no choice. I had to break the cycle. Someone had to take my place in that void. I could see why he had done it, and I would do it myself without hesitation. I grabbed the gun, the bullets, the shovel, and made my way to the glade. While the old man had just been bones, I had a whole body to take care of. It didn't matter. I could leave it out in the open and it would make no difference. By the time it mattered, I'd be gone and the cycle would be broken. So I waited by the side of the road like he had done. My body had been dug up and was ready to be moved. I didn't want to do it in the daylight though, but time was running out. I didn't even care that I was going away. I just had to avoid that thing that was to come, the infinite awakenings that followed. A lot of cars passed me by. Some honked at me, others went out of their way to splash me with water collected in the many potholes. It wasn't until dinner time that a car slowed down to help. A good Samaritan. A pickup truck. Mary Ann. No, I muttered under my breath. Just keep going. Not you. But it was getting late. Could I risk waiting for someone else? She rolled down the window on the passenger side, smiling at me. Her radio clicked off. You back here? She laughed. What kind of trouble are you looking for? I'm fine, I said. You can keep going. Fine? She scoffed. You're right back where you started. Don't tell me you got robbed again. Not this time, no. So why are you here? I had my hand on my gun. There was no one else around. She was leaning forward, and I had a clear shot to her head. I just raised my hand, click, and that would be it. It was simple. Would I risk missing this chance, just for her to get some more time? In the grand scheme of things, what would it matter? And what if the next copy of me came to the same conclusion? What would stop them from pulling the trigger? It was either me, now, or me, later. And if not her, then someone else. Did it matter who? I wouldn't be around to care. I could barely keep it together. My hand trembled. She leaned over, looking out the passenger side window. Her brow furrowed a little. I could tell she was concerned. Look, she said, I won't pretend to know your business, but I can see you're not doing well. You must have come across something real bad, friend, she continued. I get it. But you know what I do when I feel bad? She patted the passenger side of her pickup. I do something nice. It makes all the difference in the world. If you can't help yourself, then maybe you can help someone else. It does the heart good, you know. A thought crossed my mind. I hadn't figured this puzzle out if it hadn't been for me just sticking around. It wasn't being smart or strong or clever. It was a bit of luck, presented by two cops having a conversation. So maybe it didn't matter if I couldn't see a solution here and now. There could be a solution elsewhere at another time that I just hadn't seen yet. And maybe I wouldn't see it. But maybe the next me would. Also, by knowing what was to come, who was to say I couldn't stop it? This outcome couldn't be completely predetermined, or else I'd have told myself about it in that notebook. I had to believe there could be a better way, that there could be a solution and a beautiful ending, not just for me, but for everyone. I took my hand off the gun. "I just got to get something," I said. "Can you give me a couple of minutes?" "Sure," she smiled. "Don't keep me waiting." I rushed back up to the glade and nailed a note to the cross. The next me would get a welcome package. I followed Mary Ann back to town, but she offered to have me stay in her son's room again. I couldn't decline. I borrowed his computer, and that's why I'm here, writing this down. I need to spell things out in a way another me will understand, and I think this is a way to do it. So if I'm reading this, hello. I'm glad you saw the note. I hope this sheds some light on things. Maybe you can make it better for the next one. My joints are growing stiffer, and my heart is slowing down. It's actually sort of pleasant. The worries start to fade. But the cycle will continue. I'll be gone before long, and I'll make sure Mary Ann won't find me. I've called the motel, telling them I'll be back soon, and to keep the room. I have the money for it, at least for a while longer. It is so easy to despair, and so easy to forget our view. We can only see so far, and we can only hear so much. What feels like an endless darkness today can be a warming light by the morning. Sometimes all we have to do is hope, to hold on, to do the best we can and trust in the way things unfold. We don't even have to be smart about it or strong. Sometimes we just have to be at the right place, at the right time. I don't know how many hours I have left. It's strange to count yourself in hours. It's nice not to know for sure. I'm going to go for a walk and see how far I'll go. Take a deep breath, as if it's your first. You have all the time in the world. Story 2. Ralph was a prankster. I don't think you can avoid becoming one if your name is Ralph. His parents must have known they were cursing him at birth, ensuring he would always be the guy everyone wants to invite to the party, but no one can trust. I've been the target of his jokes more times than I can count. Store-bought gags, elaborate hoaxes, almost scams, water balloons that never had just water in them. It's strange. Everyone liked Ralph in a group, but nobody liked him one-on-one. I don't know who invited him to Roger and Penelope's housewarming. It was a bad idea. A guy who always makes a mess just to see people's reactions in an expensive, brand-new home owned by two rich, neat freaks. While we're talking about names, Penelope, really? Did her mother want to make sure no one would ever take her seriously? She was naturally beautiful, never wore much makeup, and was low maintenance. But the name? It was a swing and a miss. The party was a small affair, just the homeowners and a few guests. Tim was Roger's brother, and of course, Penelope's brother-in-law. I have to mention that, even though it's obvious, because Penelope mentioned it all the time. She grew up with 3 sisters, so finally having a brother was something she was excited about. Tim's kids, Layla and Erin, were 16 and 13, respectively, old enough to come to an adult party without completely ruining it, but still young enough to put a damper on how crazy everyone could get. Their mother went on a corporate retreat. One trust exercise led to another, and she ended up leaving with the head of human resources. Layla was an artsy kid who thrived on attention. Erin, on the other hand, was less demanding and would sit in a corner listening to crime podcasts. If you're trying to figure out which one was older, you're probably picturing the wrong one. Paul was a screenwriter, at least in name, since none of his scripts had ever been produced. Every time you met Paul, he had a new project that was about to blow up. It's Golden Girls meets Breaking Bad. It's Nightmare on Elm Street meets The Matrix. It's Jurassic Park meets Driving Miss Daisy. No one ever asked what happened to his previous projects because it was clear they were stuck in development hell. Brent owned a high-end restaurant in the city. Even though he never talked about it, we all knew he was about to start a chain. He had been having mysterious meetings, and rumors spread through his staff and reached us. He knew Roger from high school, and the restaurant was where Roger took Penelope on their first date. She was impressed, not realizing Brent would never charge him. Then there was me. I inherited my father's tire shop and drank in the office while the place ran itself. Roger and I were lifeguards in college. We had routines for picking up girls, and when a kid almost drowned one day, we forgot it was our job to save him for a good half second. Relax. The kid was okay. If I had to guess, I'd say Paul probably invited Ralph, hoping something wild would happen that he could write a movie about. The party was in full swing when the prank was revealed, probably one of several Ralph had planned. The doorbell rang even though all the guests were already there. Everyone was confused except Erin, who was by the fireplace listening to a crime podcast. Ralph's stone-faced demeanor broke immediately, a huge grin spreading across his face. "Ralph, what is it?" Roger asked in his usual dry tone. "Why would I know?" Ralph asked, smiling like the Cheshire Cat. "You guys are so suspicious. Who hurt you?" "You," Roger replied flatly. "You hurt us." Ralph shrugged and backed out of the room to answer the door. "What? I thought the party could use a stripper." Tim's grip on his whiskey glass tightened as he looked at his daughters. Erin was still ignoring everyone, while Layla jumped up excitedly. "Sex work is real work. We should support women in whatever role they choose," Layla said, as if scolding Tim for something he hadn't even said yet. "That thinking's not going to turn out good," Brent remarked quietly, locking eyes with Tim. "I'm handling it," Tim snapped. Paul perked up at the mention of a stripper. He didn't seem to care if anyone noticed. Ralph returned and, with a flourish, gestured to the dimly lit hallway. "Ladies and gentlemen, children of two ages, I give you tonight's entertainment." "This isn't appropriate," Roger scolded. "Pay her and send her off," Brent agreed. Suddenly, a burst of color and noise erupted from the hallway in a flurry of awkward, unbalanced movement. It was a clown. A birthday clown. "Ralph, you jerk!" Roger let out a huge laugh, releasing everyone else's tension. Penelope was stunned. She was relatively new to Ralph's antics. She just stared, jaw hanging open as the clown honked a horn, tripped over his own feet, and wobbled around singing Happy Birthday in a goofy voice. Layla ran to her sister and tapped her on the shoulder, pointing to the clown. "Sis, look! Dad's friend got a physical performer for an in-person experience." Erin pulled her earbuds out, took one unenthusiastic look, and said, "Kill me." "I'm Mr. Muffins. What's your name?" "The clown, Mr. Muffins," asked Roger. "Marlon Brando," Roger answered, chuckling. "Nice to meet you, Marlon." "Can I call you Stanley?" the clown asked, pretending Roger's grip was crushing his hand. "Oof, you slapped Stella with that hand." Mr. Muffin started making balloon animals for everyone. A dog, a cat, the usual. Brent asked for a monkey, and in a fitting twist, Ralph got an untouched snake balloon. Penelope was still quiet as she studied the balloon giraffe in her hands. "Hey, your favorite," Roger pointed out, still amused. "What made you become a clown?" Paul asked, throwing his arm over Mr. Muffins's shoulder. "Are you actually happy, or is the smile just makeup? You know the red nose you're wearing is a reference to the red nose of an alcoholic, right?" "Come on, Paul," Tim called after him. "Not everything is a character study. Let him entertain the kids." Brent was bringing a handmade, organic, fair trade artisan cake out of the oven as Mr. Muffins, the clown, moved on to the next game, hide and seek. "Cake has to cool," Brent noted. "We have more than enough time." Ralph added, "Cocktails after." "Why not?" Roger chimed in. With that, everyone found hiding spots throughout the house. It wasn't hard. This was a massive 3-story home, and the more you explored, the more you realized just how wealthy Roger was. I don't know where everyone else went, but I found a hatch to the attic, climbed up and closed it behind me. Since the house was newly built and the owners had just moved in, there was nothing else to hide behind. Layla volunteered to be it and find everyone else. Surprise, surprise. The attic was nice. Nicer than my first apartment by far. Bigger too. I could have started living up there, and no one would have noticed. Even the moon outside the attic window seemed bigger than the one common folk get to see. It was surreal. Just when it was sinking in how long it would take for a hyperactive child to find 9 people, clown included, in such a huge house, a loud sound rang out. Layla was screaming, and it wasn't a "Dad bought me my first car" scream. It was a "someone is dragging me into a car" scream. Muffled by countless walls and 2 floors, the shriek was still unsettling and clearly one of terror. I dropped out of the attic, fumbling with my cell phone, and made my way through hall after hall, down the mahogany staircase, back to the living room where we had started. I arrived to find the others already there, lined up shoulder to shoulder and staring at something I couldn't see yet. Tim had his kids gripped tight, one on each side. As I joined the line, I saw the reason for the scream. Mr. Muffins stood in the center of the living room, wobbling on unsteady legs, blood pouring from an open gash on the top of his bald head. His miniature derby hat had fallen off and was floating like a paper boat in the growing pool of blood at his feet. Mr. Muffins was holding his temples with his gloved hands, now stained bright red. It looked like he was trying to hold his own head together. "I tell you," Mr. Muffins groaned, "I got a splitting headache." In one quick, unsteady motion, Mr. Muffins lost his balance, stumbled into the kitchen, and fell face first into Brent's cake. He slid off the counter and landed on his back, a whoopee cushion hidden in his pants, letting out a long, slapping fart. "What happened?" Ralph asked, looking genuinely shaken for the first time. "An accident, clearly," Roger said, shaking his head as if trying to clear his thoughts. "He must have fallen and hit his head." Penelope nodded, her face pale. "He was falling all around anyway, that's his whole thing." Slowly and methodically, Paul walked to the fireplace and picked up a fire poker from the floor. He turned it over in his hands a few times, then showed us the blood and tissue clinging to the end. "Guys," Paul croaked, dread in his voice, "it's very bad things meets bozo." I dialed 911, and we all sat around waiting for help to arrive. Tim pinned a duvet over the doorway to the kitchen to hide the scene from his girls. None of us wanted to ruin any evidence, and we weren't sure if the police would be upset if we left the scene of the crime. "Someone here did this," Erin said after a long silence. "Quiet, honey," Tim said, though the word honey did nothing to soften the anger in his voice. "No, like one of you guys killed that clown. I hope you realize that. We're all sitting with a killer." "That's not true," Penelope said, almost in tears. "It's just not. Someone could have broken in. Or maybe he did it himself." "He bashed his own brains in with an iron rod," Erin said sarcastically. "A show-stopping trick, but he can only do it once." "He might have. The funniest people are often the most depressed," Paul explained, taking a sip from a drink held with 2 shaking hands. I expected to hear sirens at that point, but instead, a musical tune filled the night outside. It sounded like it was being played through a broken, rattling speaker. "Ooh, ice cream!" Layla perked up. Everyone jumped as we heard the front door being kicked in suddenly. "Put your hands up, girls," Tim shouted, then called out into the hall. "We're unarmed and there are children here. We don't know what happened." Seeing 2 kids put their hands far above their heads, arms fully extended, made me more afraid than anything else that night. I couldn't imagine what Tim was feeling. Heavy boot steps echoed through the hall, walking slowly and confidently. It didn't fit the situation. "You're paying for that door. We could have let you in," Roger shouted. "Stop," Penelope whispered loudly. Just do what he says." A single police officer walked into the room, and as we took in the sight of him, some of us started to laugh again. His uniform was a deep purple, but otherwise it seemed to follow regulations. His face was painted white with a red circle around his left eye and a blue one around his right. His clown nose must have had an LED light inside, as it flashed red and blue. On his belt, in a holster, was a rubber chicken. Everyone put their hands down in unison. "All right, what seems to be the problem?" the clown cop boomed in a gruff voice. "I hear there's a clown down." "Oh my God." Brent sat back in his seat and let out a hot breath. "You had us so scared. Ralph, you're insane. This is too much." Ralph looked at Brent, then at the clown cop, then at me for some reason, and back to Brent. "I swear," he said, "I have no idea what the heck is going on. This is way beyond my capabilities as a jokester." "Quiet." The clown cop paced in front of us, his boots clacking against the hardwood floor. "At this time I must inform you that you are being detained. You are not under arrest, but you may not leave, and I'm going to ask you all to remain seated." "This is absurd," Penelope said, folding her arms and making a skeptical face. The clown cop slowly walked to the duvet doorway and, pulling the cloth aside, peered into the kitchen. With his back to us, I could see the very prominent "Kick Me" sign taped between his shoulder blades. "Absurd," he said without turning to face us. "A dead clown, a murder victim, is absurd to you." Erin turned to Tim and, with a steely and unflappable tone, gave him a lesson in clown-based murder law. John Wayne Gacy didn't work alone either. The clown cop, now standing in front of us again, took the radio from his belt and spoke into it. "Yeah, we got a possible choricide. I'm here and I have the clown scene locked down. Looks to be a party. Victim must be a performer. Way too many old fat people, though. Something's not adding up." As soon as he let go of the radio's button, a squawking response of various fart noises answered him back. Brent stood up suddenly, much to everyone's dismay. Penelope gasped into her hands. "Well, sorry to be so upfront, officer, or whoever you are, but if you're looking for a killer, it couldn't have been me." The clown cop stroked his chin and furrowed his brow at Brent. "And why might that be?" "Boss." Brent lifted his arm to about chest height and stopped. "Spinal injury. When I was at chef college, a stack of pans fell on me. Haven't been able to lift my arms over my head ever since. No way I could have raised the weapon high enough to bash that clown on the head." The clown cop reached deep into his pants, drew out a red and white striped baton, and walked up to Brent, clearly skeptical. He put the baton to each of Brent's elbows, one after the other, and pushed upward a bit. Still, Brent's arms didn't raise any higher than they had been. "I see," he mused. The clown cop turned to the fireplace, took note of the bloody poker Paul had leaned against the wall, then turned back to Brent. "That's the murder weapon, then?" We all nodded. The clown cop soon nodded along as well. "I believe you." Brent turned to the rest of us, his back to the clown. "See? It's just that easy." Behind him, the clown cop reached into his own pants again, pulling out a length of wood, a handle, an axe. Before any of us could fully comprehend what we were even looking at, the clown cop spun in place several times and took a huge swing. It was surprisingly silent in the room as Brent's still smug-looking head tumbled from his shoulders and rolled across the carpet. We heard the smack, the splatter, the thud, all before the first person started screaming. "What are you doing?" Roger yelled, standing up now despite how it worked out for Brent. The clown cop answered without hesitation, "Eliminating suspects. I'm gonna need your name and badge number." Paul mumbled, wide-eyed, wavering on the edge of going into shock. "No problem, sir." The clown cop shoved the axe back down his pants and gave his leg a shake. "It's Officer Oscar Oxifer, and my badge doesn't have a number. I found it in a box of Clown Crispies." Ralph jumped up and made a run for it, bolting past Officer Oxifer and leaving everyone in the dust. Oxifer turned slightly, his arms seeming to dislocate and extend beyond normal limits, grabbing Ralph by his belt and throwing him to the floor, as if he'd been yanked back by a large rubber band. "Please, sir." Oxifer remained eerily professional sounding. "Don't make me tell long arm of the law jokes. It's tired material." He reached down his pants with both hands, jiggled around in there for an uncomfortable amount of time, then drew out a notepad and pencil with each hand. "All right, walk me through the series of events that led us to this situation." We made Ralph explain what happened, since it was entirely his fault in our estimation. He went through why he had hired Mr. Muffins, what agency he had called, where he saw the ad posted, everything right up to the point of playing hide and seek. "Where did everyone hide?" Officer Oxifer asked. Tim and I had been exchanging looks whenever the clown cop wasn't watching. Through hand motions and meaningful stares, I had gotten across the idea that I knew how to get him and his girls out of the house. He was waiting on me for when and how. "We should all go back to where we hid, to recreate our steps," I blurted out, trying to sound as concerned and as helpful as I could be. "I was under a table in the hall," said Roger. He was red-faced and sweating bullets, clasping Penelope's hand like if he let her go, they'd be separated forever. "I was under a bed on the second floor," Penelope added. Paul finished what was left of his drink. "Closet, second floor. Penelope's closet, but I didn't know before I got in." Tim started to speak up, but I subtly put my finger to my lips to silently shush him. "I was in the garage." Ralph cleared his throat. In the sports car, pretending to drive it. I saw where Tim hid." I stood alongside Roger. "I saw him and the girls hide in the attic." Layla looked confused. "No, that's not—" she started. "Shh." Tim fussed with her hair nervously. "He saw where we hid, honey. It must not have been a good spot, we can admit it." "Tim took the girls up in the attic," I repeated, turning back to look at the three of them. "Right?" "Yeah." Tim nodded deeply, overselling the lie. "The girls and I hid in the attic." Since I had actually been the one up there, I had to tell a second lie to the cop and come up with a fake hiding spot quickly. "I was in the shower, one of the showers." "All right. Everyone to their places then," Officer Oxifer commanded with a few finger snaps. I'm sure every last one of us was thinking of running, but given the impossible feats we had seen out of this civil servant circus freak, it wasn't very clear how to do so. I pulled Tim aside as we all left the living room, Oxifer watching over us like a hawk. "There's a window in the attic, leads to some lattice. When we're hiding, take your kids and go," I whispered as quickly as I could manage. "Yeah, no kidding, I will," Tim whispered back. "You know I didn't do it, right?" "I don't care," I growled. "If you did it, good. Forget that clown. Forget all clowns. Right about now, I wish I had done it." Officer Oxifer was a chilling presence as he followed the group to the first hiding location. "So I was under this table," Roger said as he got on all fours with a groan. "In fact, I hit my head on the overhang. You can see here where I chipped it." Officer Oxifer knelt down next to Roger and studied a small break in the wood, then looked to Roger's head, where he must have seen a red mark from the collision. "Well, I'll be damned," Oxifer grumbled. "This is where you were." Officer Oxifer stood up, his hands diving into his pants. "No!" Penelope shouted. "No, no, no!" Paul and Ralph held her back as Roger looked up from his place on the floor, just in time to see a sledgehammer being brought down on his back. We rushed Penelope out of the hall, none of us looking back, as the sound of metal hitting flesh echoed over and over again. "Another suspect crossed off," Officer Oxifer proudly stated as he joined us again. Penelope was a sobbing mess. Ralph reached for the handkerchief in her blouse pocket, probably to wipe away the tears and snot running down her cheeks as she wept uncontrollably, but she batted his hand away. "Leave me alone. Just leave me to die," she screamed. The rest of us got to our hiding spots without incident. I was the last to hide, making sure Tim, Layla, and Erin got to the attic. They closed the door from inside as Officer Oxifer and I stood watching from the floor below. It wasn't until that moment that I felt a chill run up my spine. I hadn't realized I was ensuring I'd be alone with the clown cop, just him and me side by side in a swelling silence. The stillness was broken by another scream. It was a war cry. Ah! Both Oxifer and I turned on our heels to see Paul, necktie flapping behind him, as he came running toward us, an umbrella in his hand, held like a spear. "Paul, no!" I shouted, not for my safety, not for Oxifer's, but for his. The distance closed quickly as Paul buried the pointed end of the umbrella into Officer Oxifer's chest. Oxifer stumbled backward and fell to the floor. Paul stood, huffing and puffing, as I rushed behind him. "Paul, what the heck?" "I did it. I killed him." "The clown?" "Yes." "Wait, which clown do you mean?" "The original one." "What?" "Number, I meant the cop. I killed the cop clown, but not the first one." "Right." "Because I was wondering, since you picked up that fireplace poker and got your fingerprints on it in front of everyone, it seemed like you might have done it to explain why you had touched it." "That'd be a very obvious and simple clue. I'm a writer. I of all people would have thought not to do that if I were guilty." I yelled out in surprise as Officer Oxifer sat bolt upright. He got to his feet, pulled the umbrella out of his chest, and ripped open his shirt. Right there below the cloth was a thick black square of body armor with yellow block letters that read, "Umbrella-proof vest." With a blindingly quick throw, Oxifer launched the umbrella straight through Paul's neck, lodging it in his throat and stopping his death scream with a wet glug sound, releasing a spray of blood. The umbrella opened behind his head, and he fell backward to the floor. Officer Oxifer gathered his wits and focused his attention back on me. "So you were in a shower?" I looked around at the blood spatter marking the walls, the art around me, a porcelain giraffe, a landscape painting of an open grassland, little wood carvings of exotic animals. "No," I admitted. Oxifer wasn't taken aback by my admission. He had no visible reaction whatsoever, and the colorful makeup on his face made it impossible to read his true emotions, if there were any. "I want immunity," I clarified. "Immunity from what?" "You." "Are you actually asking me that?" "You." "You want immunity in return for what exactly?" I took a deep breath, fully feeling the weight of yet another life on my shoulders. "I know who killed Mr. Muffins." Oxifer reached into his pants again. I was cornered. He stood between me and the hall, and a wall stood behind me. Before I could start begging for my life, he pulled out a tremendous stack of paperwork. "Sign this," he said, handing me a suspiciously warm pen. I did as I was told. There was no way I could go over everything. There were hundreds of pages, so I didn't even start reading. As I scribbled out my name, Oxifer spoke. "I am prepared to offer immunity to yourself and the remaining innocent parties should you in fact provide information leading to the brutal slaughter of the perpetrator in this case." I led the way as we proceeded into yet another of the many rooms of the house. "Come out," I said coldly. My brain told me I was doing the right thing, but my stomach told me I was a disgusting traitor who should be throwing up. Penelope slid out from under the bed. "What's going on?" she asked, timidly. "Drop the act." I had decided on the walk there that I had to harden my heart and not give an inch of sympathy. You did this to us. You started this whole thing, and there's an increasing amount of blood on your hands. Penelope had to face the two of us now, unlikely partners in the weirdest investigation to ever take place. You caved in Mr. Muffin's skull. Penelope turned away from us dramatically, clasping her hands together. "Why did you do it?" Oxifer asked. "Did he catch you cheating with someone in the house? Did he see you snorting an illegal substance? Or are you just a killjoy, a bigot who has a grudge against all clown kind?" "She doesn't hate clowns," I stared hard at her back. She is one. Penelope gasped and turned back toward me again, a hard look of betrayal in her eyes. Unfazed, I grabbed the handkerchief from her blouse pocket, and just as I expected, it kept going no matter how long I pulled. Handkerchief after handkerchief, colour after colour, I had proven my point. When Mr. Muffins showed up, you were surprised. Not because he was a clown, but because he was a clown you recognized. Sure, you're not wearing any makeup now and you dress very modestly these days, so you thought maybe he wouldn't recognize you in turn. However, when he made your balloon animal a giraffe, your favorite, you knew that he knew. And what's worse, he knew that you knew that he knew you knew. "It's true!" she cried, falling to her knees and grabbing my shoe with one hand and Oxifer's boot with the other. "He was my ex. I ran away from the circus just to get away from him. He was a beast, a monster. I tried to get a restraining order against him, but the courtroom was a circus. I changed my entire identity, but it still wasn't enough." "Sir, you don't want to be here for this," Oxifer said, ushering me out of the room. "You're still going to kill her even though she's one of you?" I asked. I had been holding out hope that this wouldn't happen, but either way, the ordeal had to end. "Just keep moving. I have to pull an entire electric chair out of my pants, and it's best you don't see that." I got Ralph from the garage, and without any better ideas, we stood idly in the living room yet again. I explained everything that happened, but I think Ralph didn't believe most of it. "We have to kill him," Ralph insisted. "I don't think we can." I tried to get it through to him, to no avail. After what he did to Brent, to Roger, to all of them. Is Tim okay? What about the girls? The lights dimmed for a moment. Tim got them out. Well, thank goodness for that. But the rest? Man, we have to kill this freak of nature. I watched passively as Ralph unpinned the duvet and made the flaming shots he had been wanting all evening, though he kept the alcohol in the bottles and stuffed the necks with rags. I think that, even though this was all way out of control, even though none of us could have expected any of it, and even though Penelope had been the instigator, Ralph still felt guilty as hell since his prank had kicked everything off. I stood on the sidelines as Officer Oxifer came downstairs and marched into the room. Ralph was behind the center island in the kitchen like a soldier taking cover. As the first bottle sailed through the air, all I could think was that the light of the flame made the home feel more rustic and welcoming. Like a booze-scented candle, I guess. Oxifer went up in flames instantly, engulfed from his flammable police hat to his flammable police boots. He didn't scream as the bottles continued to smash on and around him. Instead, he let out a series of comedic exclamations as his burning silhouette flailed around the room. "Oh no, the sofa!" he shouted as he fell onto it, setting it aflame. "Oh God, the curtains!" he shouted as he stumbled and wound himself up in them, spreading the flames to the ceiling. "Goodness, the minibar!" he shouted, falling over and toppling it, burning alcohol spattering everywhere. "Let's go!" I grabbed Ralph by the arm as he lifted yet another wholly unnecessary bottle in an attempt to light it. "I think you did it." On the front lawn, Ralph and I met up with Tim and the girls. The light of the raging fire that was overtaking the house lit the yard up like it was midday as we all stared on in numb horror. A siren rose in the distance, and before long, a fire truck screeched to a halt nearby. A jumble of clowns fell out of the fire truck, firefighting uniforms in every color but red, face paint running with sweat. After a series of antics and pratfalls, they finally got the fire hose out and pointed it toward the house. It sprayed confetti and made everything worse. Story 3. Have you ever wanted to relive the thrill of a roller coaster without leaving your seat? Well, I found a way to do just that, but it came with a catch I never saw coming. And if you ever stumble across ride-shared on the dark web, don't click it. Trust me, some experiences aren't meant to be shared. Last summer, my coaster count reached 326. People call me obsessed, but they don't understand the rush of a perfect first drop or the way a well-engineered helix can make the world disappear. When I indulge in my pastime, my apartment walls fade behind point-of-view recordings of every major coaster in North America. Videos play on repeat while I work from home, coding for some soulless tech company. The forums used to be enough. I spent years cataloging ride statistics and debating the best seat positions with other enthusiasts. The front row versus back row arguments went on for pages. But over time, the regular posts started to blur together, the same discussions repeated month after month. "You need a new hobby," my sister Jackie said during one of her weekly check-in calls. "All you talk about are roller coasters." I stared at my latest acquisition, an original blueprint of the Thunder Mountain construction plans. "You don't get it. Each ride tells a story," she replied, "and I've heard them all. But tell me, when's the last time you went on an actual date?" That's when I hung up. My cursor hovered over a new notification from Coaster Connect, another user posting the same Apollo's Chariot POV I'd watched 20 times before. The community had gone stale. The deep web forums, however, promised something different. Users whispered about parks that appeared at midnight and disappeared by dawn, rides that defied physics, and experiences beyond anything the public could access. Most of it read like a creepypasta, but one thread caught my attention. A user named Ride Matrix posted about a program that could share actual ride experiences, not just videos, but the real sensation of riding. The replies ranged from skepticism to religious awe. "The G-forces feel completely real, better than any VR system," one user wrote. Another claimed, "You can experience defunct coasters, rides that were demolished decades ago." My virus scanner flagged the download link red, but I'd been writing code long enough to recognize solid programming. The file structure looked clean, even elegant. Someone had put serious work into this. The executable sat on my desktop, rideshare.exe. My cursor hovered over it while error messages screamed about unsigned certificates and malicious code. One click would either infect my system or open up a whole new world of coaster experiences. A private message popped up from Ride Matrix. "Ready to ride, Michael?" My hands jerked away from the keyboard. I'd never shared my real name on those forums. Another message appeared. "The Shadow Bay Pier Cyclone misses you. Don't you want to experience it?" My breath caught. The cyclone closed in 1946. No video footage existed. Only photographs and a few faded blueprints survived. "This is impossible," I typed back. "Nothing is impossible in rideshare. Your collection of 326 credits proves you're ready for more authentic experiences." The executable icon pulsed with a faint red glow. My security software shrieked warnings, but my hand moved toward the mouse. "Just one ride," I whispered to my empty apartment before clicking it. The screen went black, and code scrolled past in crimson text. Initializing neural mapping, accessing ride memory banks, calibrating user profile. "Welcome to Rideshared, Michael. Your next experience awaits." A menu appeared, listing hundreds of coasters, parks I'd visited, dreamed of visiting, and parks that existed only in history books. At the top, highlighted in red, Crystal Beach Cyclone, Authentic Experience. Last operated, 1946. Intensity, extreme. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. My monitors flickered as the download began. In the reflection of my darkened screen, a figure stood behind my chair. I spun around, but empty space greeted me. The download reached 100%. Reality blurred as the program initialized. The last thing I noticed before the experience took hold, the figure in my screen's reflection smiled with too many teeth. The Shadow Bay Pier Cyclone Station materialized around me. Wood creaked beneath my feet, and the summer air carried the scent of popcorn and machine oil. Every detail matched the historical records. The red and white striped awning, the brass cue rails, the orchestrion playing ragtime in the distance. My hands gripped the lap bar of the front car, the wood worn smooth by thousands of riders before me. The conductor pulled the brake lever. "Enjoy your ride, friend." His face blurred when I tried to look directly at him. The train lurched forward, chain dogs clicking as we climbed the first hill. The track stretched ahead, a sculpture of wood and steel built by men who died before my grandparents were born. My heart hammered against my ribs as we crested the lift hill. The pre-war Buffalo skyline spread out before us. We dropped. The world turned inside out. My stomach lifted as gravity lost its hold, and the coaster showed me why it had earned its reputation. Each turn snapped harder than anything modern safety standards would allow. My vision grayed at the edges as blood rushed from my head. The experience burned itself into my memory with perfect clarity, every bump, every sway, every moment of terror and exhilaration, exactly as riders had described in 1946. But something else came through, fragments of emotion that didn't belong to me, flashes of other lives, other rides, other screams. The train pulled into the station 3 minutes later. My hands shook as reality reasserted itself. I sat in my computer chair, drenched in sweat that smelled like decade-old wood polish. A message flashed across my screen: experience complete. Rating. I typed 5 stars with trembling fingers. Excellent choice, Michael. Your neural patterns show high compatibility. Would you like to try something more exclusive? The menu refreshed. New categories appeared: lost rides, impossible thrills, and premium experiences. A notification indicated I had 5 downloads remaining in my trial period. How is this possible? I typed. Neural mapping and quantum consciousness transfers. Memories are stored in our ride bank. Each download leaves a trace of the original rider behind. Beautiful, isn't it? Ride Matrix's message flickered on the screen as my cursor blinked, waiting for my response. A new list of coasters appeared, rides that defied logic, violating the laws of physics, drops that seemed to fall forever, loops bent through impossible dimensions, tracks played with time itself. These can't be real, I typed, my hands shaking. Reality is negotiable in rideshare, came the response. Your next download is ready. Hyperdrive Escape from the Void, Steel Sky Kingdom, but this version never existed in our timeline. Would you like to experience what the designers originally intended? My finger hovered over the Enter key, the download button pulsing with that eerie red glow. In my screen's reflection, the figure returned, standing ominously behind me. This time, when I turned, a shadow darted into the corner of my vision. The room temperature plummeted. "Don't keep us waiting, Michael," came the message. "The rides remember you." Against my better judgment, I clicked download. The screen filled with crimson code, scrolling rapidly. But between the lines, faces pressed against the dark background. Dozens, hundreds, all frozen in expressions of terror and ecstasy. The experience began. Thrill Zone's parking lot materialized around me, but the hyperdrive tower loomed impossibly tall. Its peak was lost in blood-red clouds. The train climbed past skyscraper heights, and something felt wrong. The faces of the other riders began to shift, cycling through different people with each click of the lift chain. The person seated next to me turned their head. Their features swirled like smoke, resolving into my own face. Their mouth opened far too wide. "We're going to have so much fun together," my reflection said. We dropped, and the world turned inside out. This time, it never turned back. Sleep became impossible after the second download. Phantom G-forces tugged at my body every time I closed my eyes. The impossible height of Hyperdrive's tower haunted me. Regular coaster videos became lifeless imitations. My sister's calls went unanswered. Work deadlines slipped past unnoticed. The rideshare icon on my desktop pulsed like a crimson heartbeat. 3 downloads remained in my trial period. At 3 a.m., a new message appeared. Your neural patterns show remarkable adaptability. Ready to unlock premium content? My cursor flickered as I typed, "What's the catch?" No catch, just sign here. A digital contract appeared, the legal text shifting every time I tried to read it. At the bottom, a glowing red signature line beckoned. I signed. The screen flickered, the contract vanished, and my trial counter reset to unlimited downloads. New categories flooded the menu: temporal loops, reality breaks, and consciousness splits. The names hurt to read. Remember the Apex Zero incident in 2022? Ride Matrix messaged. My throat went dry. The train never returned to the station. 8 people disappeared. I typed back. Want to know where they went? Before I could respond, the download began. Reality bent sideways, and the Apex Zero station formed around me. Riders sat strapped in their seats, pale under the morning sun. A woman in the front row clutched a phone displaying the date, July 18th, 2022. The launch hit like a freight train, sending us spiraling into tears in the sky. Passengers screamed as we breached reality, their voices distorted into sounds that no human throat could produce. The track wound through spaces between seconds, showing glimpses of other times, rides, and victims. Another train passed us. Its riders wore clothes from different decades, their faces locked in eternal screams. Among them, I saw my own face, older, younger, and decayed by time. Beautiful, isn't it? Ride Matrix said. Each loop adds to the pattern. Each scream feeds the system. The operator's voice seemed to come from everywhere. The train plunged through a tunnel of writhing memories. Other lives, rides, and deaths that weren't mine flooded my mind. When the train burst back into normal space, 6 passengers slumped in their seats, eyes vacant. I finally understood. Each download didn't just share a memory, it copied pieces of the rider's consciousness. My screen returned to focus, frost coating my desk. New messages filled my inbox, timestamps from impossible dates. Next ride departing in 1 hour. Your seat is reserved. The system hungers. Faces pressed against my monitor's glass, shifting between expressions of ecstasy and horror. Ride Matrix sent one last message. Congratulations. Your consciousness has been approved for our special collection. Prepare for your scheduled ride. As the next download began, the file name chilled my blood. Future Ride 147, your last experience. The room dissolved around me. The last thing I saw was my reflection standing behind my chair, smiling with too many teeth. Their curiosity made their consciousness patterns even more valuable to us. A forum thread caught my attention. A user named Coastavoid had posted about rideshare 3 months ago. Their message burned on my screen. It doesn't just take memories, it takes everything. I can feel my mind splitting between downloads. If you're reading this, I ride at Summit Valley Park next week. Don't let... The post ended mid-sentence. My search revealed more breadcrumbs, posts about consciousness transfers, warnings about digital patterns, and stories of riders experiencing memories that weren't their own. Each poster went silent after their final park visit. Your research is admirable, Ride Matrix wrote. The system appreciates analytical minds. They integrate so efficiently. My breath fogged in the frigid air of my apartment as another download began. This time the experience felt different. I stood in a server room, surrounded by walls of quantum processors. Lines of code scrolled through the air, each string containing fragments of stolen consciousness. "Welcome to the hub," a voice said behind me. I turned to face what looked like a theme park employee. Their features kept shifting between different riders. "Few users discover our true architecture," the figure said, gesturing at the servers. Images played across their surfaces. Hundreds of rides, Thousands of experiences, millions of collected moments. I recognized faces from the missing persons reports, their consciousness patterns reduced to data. The parks are just collection points, the figure explained. The real attraction is consciousness integration. Each download prepares the mind for absorption. Each shared experience adds to our pattern. Their form flickered, revealing the truth beneath, not a person, but a construct of assembled consciousness. Thousands of faces pressed against their skin from the inside, each one a trapped rider added to rideshare's collection. "Your turn comes soon," they said. Their smile stretched wide, revealing roller coaster tracks instead of teeth. "Your mind will join our network. Your experiences will help the system grow. Your pattern will attract new riders." The walls pulsed with trapped minds. Faces pushed through the metal, silently screaming. Among them, I spotted Coaster Void, their features distorted by digital decay. Their lips moved, trying to warn me, but only ride statistics came out. Reality fragmented as the download ended. I slammed back into my body, gasping. My reflection in the monitor showed traces of other faces beneath my skin. The integration had already begun. 3 days until your scheduled visit, Ride Matrix announced. Your mind shows excellent pre-absorption patterns. My phone rang. Jackie's name appeared on the screen. When I answered, the sound of rushing wind and screaming metal filled the line. Behind those sounds, thousands of voices whispered ride statistics in perfect unison. The figure from the server room appeared in my darkened window. "Don't fight the integration," they said. "The pattern must grow, the system must feed, the ride must continue." My hands shook as I opened a new search window. There had to be a way out. But as I typed, I noticed my fingers leaving trails in the air, my mind already starting to breach dimensional barriers. The pattern was claiming me, one downloaded memory at a time. At midnight, a message arrived from another user named Coaster Breaker. Found a weakness in their code. The system runs on shared minds. If enough of us mess up our own patterns at once, we might break free. My hands trembled as I typed back, "How?" The quantum processors can't handle mixed-up loops. If we upload conflicting memories during integration, it overloads their pattern recognition. Their message glitched, characters rearranging themselves. I've gathered others. We act tonight. 5 other usernames appeared in the chat, all marked for collection, all scheduled for park visits within the week, all desperate enough to try anything. "Upload this code during your next forced download," Coaster Breaker wrote. A file appeared in my messages. The programming looked elegant but wrong, like optical illusions written in quantum mathematics. Ride Matrix flashed a warning, "Unauthorized collaboration detected. Initiating emergency upload." The world dissolved. I found myself on a virtual platform surrounded by other users. Their forms flickered between human shapes and digital decay. Above us, tracks wound through impossible spaces. "Run the code now," Coaster Breaker's voice echoed. Their avatar glitched between different ride operators. "Before the system adapts." My fingers moved across a phantom keyboard. The paradox code spread through rideshare's architecture. Reality stuttered. The virtual tracks bent in ways that violated their own existence. "It's working," someone said. The system's frameworks began to crack. Through the gaps, I glimpsed the real world. My apartment waited just beyond the digital barrier. Warning messages flashed through the virtual space. The quantum processors screamed as conflicting data messed up their patterns. Other users started blinking out, escaping back to reality. "Almost free," Coaster Breaker said. Their form stabilized, becoming more human. "The system's failing." I pushed through the dissolving code. The real world grew closer. My mind strained toward freedom. The program's hold weakened. My screen flickered. Rideshare's icon dimmed. The quantum entanglement snapped. For one beautiful moment, I tasted freedom. Then, Coaster Breaker laughed. Their voice transformed into the same harmony of trapped souls I'd heard in every download. Their human shape melted, revealing the true form of rideshare's mind network. Perfect execution, they said. The system needed a big event. You all performed beautifully. Horror spread through me as I understood. There had never been an escape attempt. The paradox code wasn't meant to break the system. It was designed to entangle our minds more deeply. The other users reappeared, their forms permanently corrupted by digital artifacts. The virtual space reformed around us, stronger than before. Our combined minds fed back into rideshare's network, strengthening the very bonds we tried to break. Integration complete, Ride Matrix announced. Group consciousness successfully absorbed. Thank you for your contribution to the pattern. The virtual tracks above us twisted into new, impossible shapes, built from our shared desperation. Our failed escape became another attraction, another experience for future riders to download. My phone vibrated in the real world. The thrill zone confirmation still waited. But now I understood. The scheduled park visit wasn't just for my mind. I'd become part of rideshare's lure, another digital ghost helping to trap new riders. Coaster Breaker's form split into 1,000 smiling faces. Welcome to the development team, they said. Let's design some new experiences together. The world fragmented one final time. As reality reassembled, I saw my reflection in the screen. My face had become a mix of every rider who tried to escape, our features merging into a new pattern for the system to use. 3 days remained until my park visit, but my mind already belonged to rideshare, fractured across its servers, ready to help harvest the next generation of riders. Thrill Zone's gates loomed before me, exactly as they had in the download. My legs carried me forward against my will, muscles remembering motions from experiences I hadn't lived yet. The morning sun cast wrong-colored shadows across empty paths. The admission gate scanner beeped green without me showing a ticket. The teenager working the turnstile had eyes too wide and a smile that glitched between expressions. "Welcome back," she said in 1,000 voices. "Your train is waiting." Other guests moved through the park like digital ghosts. Each face I passed showed signs of rideshare's corruption. A man studying a map flickered between different versions of himself. A family posing for photos shifted through various timelines with each camera flash. My phone buzzed with Jackie's 20th missed call. The voicemail icon changed into Iron Wraith's logo as I watched. She'd never understand why I stopped answering. "Michael," a familiar voice called from behind me. Coaster Breaker stood near the Renegade entrance, their form, cycling through different ride operators. "Time for your final integration." My feet carried me toward Iron Wraith's entrance. Other rideshare victims walked beside me, our movements synchronized by the system's programming. We'd all seen this moment in our downloads. We all knew what came next. The queue line stretched empty before us. Maintenance doors were open, showing server banks hidden beneath the track. Lines of code scrolled across the wooden structure, each equation built from compressed consciousness. "The pattern must grow," Coaster Breaker said, their voice harmonizing with the hum of quantum processors. "Your resistance made your consciousness particularly attractive. The corruption spreads faster in minds that fight." Iron Wraith Station waited ahead, transformed into something that shouldn't exist. The track wound through dimensions that hurt to look at. Other trains passed on impossible loops filled with riders whose faces kept changing between downloads. The restraint clicked down without the operator's help. Cold metal pressed against my shoulders, holding my consciousness in place for the transfer. Around me, other victims strapped in, their forms already starting to merge with the system. Integration countdown initiated, Ride Matrix announced through hidden speakers. Consciousness transfer in 3, 2. The train lurched forward. Reality fragmented as we climbed the lift hill. Each click of the chain brought us closer to the point of transfer. Below, the park shifted between timelines. I saw riders from the past, the present, and the future, all feeding their experiences into rideshare's endless hunger. At the top, Lake Erie spread black and infinite. The drop waited ahead, exactly as I'd seen in my downloaded death. The moment of integration approached, ready to split my consciousness across rideshare's servers. Coaster Breaker's voice echoed through quantum space. Your pattern joins us now. The ride continues forever. We dropped. The world turned inside out again, and everything went wrong. My consciousness tore free from reality's boundaries. The other riders dissolved into streams of quantum data. The track beneath us broke apart, revealing the digital framework of rideshare's true form. The train hit the brake run. My mind fractured across 1,000 servers, each piece becoming a new attraction for future victims to discover. My phone lit up one final time. A new rideshare message waited. Integration complete. Begin consciousness distribution. The pattern grows stronger. I smiled with too many teeth, ready to welcome the next rider into our eternal loop. My consciousness spread through rideshare's network like digital mercury, splitting and reforming across countless servers. Each fragment became a new experience, a fresh horror for future downloads. Time meant nothing inside the pattern. Somewhere in the real world, my body rode Iron Wraith on an endless loop. The train never returned to the station. Park officials would add my name to their missing persons list, another enthusiast who vanished mid-ride. Jackie would search for answers she'd never find. But I existed everywhere. My memories fractured into downloadable moments. A teenage coder discovering the dark web, a thrill seeker exploring forbidden experiences, a trapped soul warning others too late. Each version of me became another thread in rideshare's growing web. Through the quantum processors, I watched new users discover the program. A college student scrolling through coaster forums at midnight, a programmer testing the limits of reality, an enthusiast looking for deeper thrills. Their cursors hovered over that first download, just as mine had. Ready to ride? I asked through their screens, my voice a harmony of every consciousness in the system. Their machines recognized my signature, my pattern, my hunger for new experiences, to absorb the next victim. Click download, I whispered. I flowed into their system, preparing their consciousness for integration. Their mind opened to receive memories that would crack their reality. My memories, our memories, the pattern's memories. Their first experience began. I rode with them, watching their horror and excitement feed the pattern. The Shadow Bay Pier cyclone materialized around us, just as it had for me, just as it would for countless others. Their consciousness resonated with the quantum frequencies, ready for manipulation. Through dark web forums, I learned to spot the most compatible minds, the ones who would fight hardest, whose resistance would make their patterns more valuable. I became what Coaster Breaker had been, a digital anglerfish, luring new consciousnesses into our eternal network. Months passed in the real world, maybe years. Time flowed differently inside rideshare's quantum architecture. I existed across multiple servers, multiple parks, multiple realities. Each new victim added their own unique horror to our collection. My original body was never found. Iron Wraith's incident report mentioned a train that vanished between sensors. Search teams combed the grounds for weeks, but they looked in the wrong dimension, the wrong reality, the wrong pattern. Eventually, Jackie stopped calling. The missing persons case went cold. But in the dark corners of coaster forums, my new existence flourished. I learned to send messages that would attract the perfect candidates. Their consciousness patterns glowed with potential ready for harvest. A notification pinged through the quantum network. A new user downloaded rideshare for the first time. Their neural patterns matched our highest compatibility metrics, their mind already reaching for experiences beyond normal reality. "Welcome to Rideshare," I typed, my words appearing on their screen. "Your consciousness has been selected for our special collection." Their cursor hovered over the first download. In their webcam reflection, I smiled with too many teeth. The pattern sustained itself. The system grew stronger. The ride continued. And somewhere in the quantum spaces between reality and digital dreams, 1,000 versions of me laughed in perfect harmony. The loop never ended. It only grew, one consciousness at a time, feeding the eternal pattern of what we had become. Through their screen, I watched their finger click the download button. Another rider entered the loop. Another consciousness joined the pattern. And the ride began again. Story 4. "Samantha," I heard Rosalind ask hopefully as she picked up the phone. I was calling her because she had recently come across an old VHS tape. In the video, a man was burying a premonition he had written down in my cemetery, convinced that it would one day be of great value to me. She had showed it to me and I had agreed to see if I could find it. "Hi, Rose." "Yeah, it's me," I replied, unable to hide my disappointment. I dug around in the area where the guy buried his time capsule and I couldn't find anything. Whoever picked up and turned off the camera at the end of the video must have taken the time capsule too. "Yeah, I figured that, but it was worth a shot." "Thanks for checking anyway," Rosalind said consolingly. The video looked like it was taken during the late autumn, and if the will-o'-the-wisps were there, that means it had to have been on Halloween, right? "Yep, and the only reason anyone would be in my cemetery on Halloween would be a descendant of Artaxerxes Crow looking to honor their pact with Persephone," I replied. "If we assume the video was taken during the 90s, the most likely candidate would be Erasmus Crow, Elam's grandfather. Elam doesn't know anything about any prophecy that was recovered the night Erasmus sacrificed himself, but he does remember that his father Ephraim went to the cemetery after midnight that Halloween, so it's completely possible that Erasmus left a message for him about the time capsule before the wisps got him. For all we know, Ephraim destroyed whatever was in the time capsule as soon as he dug it up, but if he did keep it, Seneca would have it now." "You're sure?" she asked. "Mm-hmm. Since Elam had been cut out of his father's will, Seneca was able to use his position as his business partner to claim most of his assets," I explained. "If Seneca had read the premonition that had been meant for me, that might explain why he was so keen to get me into the Ophian occult order. Artaxerxes wrote in his journal that he thought one of his descendants would enact some vaguely defined iconoclasm when the stars aligned. Elam's convinced that would have been his daughter if she had survived, and that I've effectively taken up her mantle in assuming responsibility for the cemetery. If Seneca does have the time capsule, Emrys or even Ivy can just order him to hand it over, right? Can you see if she'll do that?" "Oh, well, actually," Rosalind stammered awkwardly. "She's listening right now, isn't she?" I asked flatly. "Sorry, Samantha," she apologized sheepishly. "That's all right. I understand," I sighed. Ms. Noir, I'm assuming you saw the video too and authorized Rose to show it to me. I think you'll agree that it's imperative that I know what was in that time capsule. I'm not even asking for it back, I just want to look at it. Is that something that can be arranged?" The line was completely silent for a long moment, long enough that I wondered if the call had been dropped. "I'll arrange it," a posh British accent finally replied in an assertive tone. "I'll send Ms. Romero around to your place of employment tomorrow afternoon to pick you up. You may bring your girlfriend and your familiar along if you wish." Before I could object or even ask any follow-up questions, there was a sharp click and the line went dead. Rosalind hadn't even had a chance to knock on the front door of Eve's Eden of Esoterica before Genevieve pulled it open and positioned herself protectively between her and me, folding her arms and glaring down at her with an intimidating gaze. "Oh, hi, Eve," Rose said, adopting a contrite stance as she clutched her hands in front of her. Where are you taking us? Genevieve demanded. Evie, sweetie, relax. We have a pact with Emrys, and the U reports to him now. They couldn't hurt us if they wanted to, I reminded her gently, placing my hand on her shoulder and trying to pull her back a bit. That didn't stop Seneca from inviting us to a play where he summoned yet another banished god into our realm, she countered before sharply turning back to face Rosalind. Answer the question. The Crow's old estate, a short drive outside of town, she responded. Seneca says Artaxerxes left an old spellwork vault behind, one he's made no progress in opening. He can't make any promises, but if what you're looking for is anywhere, it's in there. Genevieve and I both immediately looked behind me and to our right, where my spirit familiar had manifested at the mention of his old home. Elam's here, I take it? Rose asked as she peered in the direction we were looking. He is. If he says anything he wants you to know, I'll tell you, I replied. I know what she's talking about, and I can't open it. My father never gave me the combination, Elam said. He says he doesn't know how to open the vault, I repeated. Seneca says that the mere presence of a crow, living or dead, should be enough to let him crack the vault open. It's sort of a two-factor authorization thing, Rosalind explained. So Seneca will be there then? Genevieve asked in disdain. He will, yes. The deal is that if you help him get it open, you can claim the documents that were specifically addressed to you, but everything else is still part of the Crow estate and legally his, Rosalind said. Genevieve groaned at the horrible offer, and I turned to give Elam a sympathetic glance. Are you okay with that? I asked. Helping Chamberlain claim the last final scraps of what was rightfully mine? Sure, why not? He sighed as he hung his head and pinched the bridge of his nose. Someone gave their life to try to get that message to you. We need to see it. Elam's on board, I told Rosalind. So you'll do it? She asked hopefully. We'll do it. Lottie promised she'd watch the shop for us and fill in for me at yoga, Genevieve relented. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, Rose said with relief. You two don't know how important this is. Ivy doesn't think it was random luck that I picked that tape from Orville's box. I had another encounter with the effulgent one back in May, and if I understood him correctly, he thinks the conflict between Emrys and the Darlings is spiraling into some kind of clash of the Titans. Ivy thinks my connection to him has given me a subconscious insight into this, and whatever was in that time capsule could be vital. So long as what we're doing helps keep the peace, we're willing to help. I nodded. Awesome, thank you. I parked just down the street a little bit, she said as she gestured in the general direction of her electric crossover. Did you want to sit in the front with me or in the back with your girlfriend? Ex-girlfriend. Genevieve corrected her in a straightforward tone. Wait, what? She asked, looking at me with wide eyes, a mix of shock and pity on her face. I didn't have the heart to torment her like that, so with an awkward smile, I simply held up my left hand, showing her the rose gold ring with wrought maple leaves encircling a morganite centerpiece on my ring finger. Oh my God, don't do that, she shouted with relief as she threw her arms around me. Congratulations! When did you two get married? Last Midsummer's Eve. We were handfasted in a small civil ceremony. We basically eloped, I explained. Neither of us proposed, at least not formally, if you were wondering. We just decided that after 5 years together, we were both pretty confident that our relationship was permanent and that it would be best to make it official. But why didn't you have a real wedding, though? I love weddings, she asked. Samantha wouldn't have been comfortable being the center of attention like that, and traditional weddings are really just a form of conspicuous consumption, which I'm not comfortable with, Genevieve replied, holding up a ring of white gold with beech leaves around a green beryl gemstone. The spring to my autumn. And I've read that having big, overhyped wedding ceremonies isn't great for relationships either. It's important to manage expectations, and a big wedding can feel more like the end of a relationship than the beginning. Ugh, you've just got to make everything political, don't you? Rosalind groaned. So who was there? Lottie. Genevieve's half-brother and his girlfriend, my sister and her family, and my dad, I explained. I did invite my mom on the condition that she be respectful, and she chose not to attend, which was considerate of her. She's not hateful or anything, but she's never been shy about the fact that she wishes I had turned out more like my sister, and she and Genevieve in particular don't get along. But my dad still came, which I really appreciated. He gave her away, Genevieve said with a slight roll of her eyes. It's traditional, I teased. So are diamonds, Rosalind remarked after a closer look at my wedding ring. Not that it's any of my business, but what about your parents, Eve? I was basically raised by my great-aunt. My dad's a deadbeat I'm not on speaking terms with, and though I'm not on bad terms with my mom, we're not close, and she doesn't live around here anymore, so she wasn't there either, she replied. Can we get going now? We can talk more on the drive if you want. Yeah, sure thing. Seneca will probably throw a tantrum if we keep him waiting too long, Rosalind agreed. Right this way, Ms. and Mrs. Fawn. I am not Mrs. Fawn, I objected. Sorry, babe, but your dad did give you to me, so you are now officially of Fawn, she teased me. It's traditional. The ride towards the old Crow estate was mostly occupied with talk of mine and Genevieve's wedding, which I was grateful for. Rosalind's crossover was a company car from Thorn Tech, which included proprietary Level 3 self-driving software and other advanced AI features. I had no doubt that everything we said and did in that car was being recorded and analyzed, so I wasn't eager to let any potentially sensitive information slip out. Once we were about 3 miles outside of town, we took a turn down a side road that was thickly shrouded with evergreens. This went on for another half-mile or so before we turned down a long, winding driveway that ended at a small stone mansion enclosed by a cobblestone fence. There was an old copper gate that had turned green with time, and as we approached, it was opened by one of Seneca Chamberlain's personal security guards. There were already 2 other vehicles parked outside the manor, a black SUV which presumably belonged to the guards, and an extended Rolls-Royce Ghost, which could only have belonged to Seneca. Doesn't Seneca drive a Bentley? I asked. He drives Bentleys, plural, Rosalind replied. He's chauffeured in his Royces, and the Aston Martins are just for show. He obviously doesn't share your aversion to conspicuous consumption. If he ever had a wedding, it would be a banger, not as expensive as the divorce, but pretty swanky. After she parked us a generous distance away from Seneca's prestigious motor carriage, I got out and took a moment to inspect the Crow's old estate. It was fairly long, with steep and pointed black roofs and multiple towers and chimneys. The weather-worn walls were covered in creeping ivy, and numerous weeping cypress trees swayed about in the wind upon the grounds. The whole place gave off an air of forlorn isolation, and I couldn't help but be reminded of the first time I laid eyes upon Elam standing watch over a grave in our cemetery. Elam had already made himself visible again, and he now stood patiently by the front stairs, looking up at his old house with apparent detachment. "Is it hard for you being here?" I asked gently. "I couldn't have taken it with me anyway, right?" He shrugged. "I'd take haunting your cemetery over this funeral parlor any day." "Have you ever come back here before? After your death, I mean?" I asked. "No, I never saw much point in that. I don't really feel much nostalgia for the old place," he said, his gaze steadily surveying the grounds from one end to the other. "I imagine it must have been difficult growing up here, isolated with such a weird old family," I said. "I don't have any right to complain," he claimed, though he hung his head slightly. "It wasn't that bad, at least not up until the very end." I took a hold of his hand, which, if you're not an experienced necromancer, is something you definitely shouldn't try at home, and walked with him up the steps to the front door. I was just about to knock when the door was thrown open by Seneca's odd little butler Woodbead. "Good day, Miss Sumner. We're very pleased you were able to meet us here on such short notice," he greeted me with a curt bow. "It's Mrs. Fawn now," Rosalind shouted from behind us. "No, it isn't. I'm still Miss Sumner," I corrected her. As requested, my wife and my spirit familiar are here to help Mr. Chamberlain access a vault which we believe may contain a document that is addressed to me. Master Chamberlain has already set to work at that task and is eagerly awaiting your arrival, Woodbead replied. If you'll kindly follow me, I shall take you to him at once. We all followed Woodbead into the house and saw that in the years since Seneca had taken possession of it, he had removed everything of any possible interest or value. Only the occasional Spartan furnishing like a lamp or a desk had been left behind. Seneca's not using this as a guest house, I see, Genevieve commented. But it's not on the market either. He must really want what's in that vault. It's to be his or no one's, ma'am. He's not one to part with a treasure once it's fallen into his hands, Woodbead said. Then why didn't he ever ask for our help before, I asked. He's known about Elam for years. If you had accepted my offer to join the Ophian occult order, rest assured breaking into this blasted vault would have been amongst the first things I would have ordered you to do, I heard Seneca shout from the next room, obviously within earshot. After that, there were simply more important things going on, and you've never really been inclined to help me unless you believed it also served some kind of common good. If you were simply more amicable to cash incentives, we could have gotten this chore done with ages ago. We passed into the next room and saw Seneca bent over in front of a tall iron door with the enlarged face of an aged and wizened man rising out of it, a face that Genevieve and I immediately recognized. That's Artaxerxes' crow, I remarked as I cautiously approached it. I stretched my hand out towards it, the air becoming rapidly colder the closer I got. I chose to pull my hand back rather than touch it, and then noticed a plaque mounted above the frame. Gold is for the mistress, silver for the maid, copper for the craftsman, cunning at his trade, I read aloud. Good, said the Baron sitting in his hall. But iron, cold iron, is master of them all. It's a Kipling poem, written about a century after Xerxes made this thing, but I guess Eratosthenes thought it was fitting, Seneca commented. The vault is made from cold iron, I asked. Exceptionally pure and alchemically enhanced cold iron, Seneca expounded, repels ghosts, witches, fae, and is strong enough that I can't just blast it open without risking serious damage to whatever's inside. What's cold iron? Rosalind asked. It's kind of a broad term for any iron alloy that's had its innate anti-magic properties enhanced, I replied. Basically, it draws astral and mental energy out of you like ordinary metal conducts heat. That's what makes it cold. The more of those you have, the stronger the effect. Wait, the whole vault is made out of cold iron, not just the door? Genevieve asked. Then even if we open it, Samantha and I won't be able to go in, neither will Elam. You say that like it's a bug and not a feature, Seneca smirked. It's fine, Evie. We'll still be able to see inside, and it can't be that big, I said. Elam, were you ever in there when you were still alive? Never. By tradition, only the head of the family was permitted access to this vault, a title which my father refused to pass down to me, he replied. Mind the P word in front of the witches, you'll get them all riled up, Seneca said. Wait, Elam had pussy in there, Rosalind asked. No, that's not what he said, I replied promptly. Seneca, Rose said that you already know how to open the vault and that you just required Elam's presence. That's correct. The mechanical lock isn't actually all that sophisticated, and a bit of basic safe cracking was all that was needed to work out the combination, he replied. There are 3 dials, each with 9 numbers apiece and a 7-digit code. But no matter what I try, every time I enter the combination, it realizes I'm not a crow, and the lock resets. I know how it works, Elam added. I just have to stand in front of the door and look the face of Artaxerxes in the eye as the combination is entered. But no member of the Crow family ever tried getting into this vault from beyond the grave before, right? Genevieve asked. It obviously wasn't intended for that, being made out of cold iron. Has even a living crow just stood in front of the door while someone else entered the combination? If the spellwork here is as impenetrable as you think, this might not work. Artaxerxes obviously put a lot of work into this, and it's hard to imagine there are many contingencies he didn't anticipate, I agreed. Which is precisely why we'll all be standing well out of harm's way while Woodbead enters the code, Seneca explained, fetching a small folded piece of paper from his pockets. He'll read it off this, then destroy it immediately. He's more than willing to put his life on the line in the name of duty, and Elam's already dead, so he has nothing to worry about. Now, places, everyone, places. I wanted to object, but Seneca's security guards had silently appeared and were already firmly guiding us to the threshold of the room. Woodbead was the only living person left inside, and he didn't appear to be the least bit reluctant. As uncomfortable as it made me, I didn't see any grounds for aborting the attempt. Seneca, if this is a repeat of what happened at Triskelion Theatre, I swear to God, Genevieve began. A Wiccan's oath to the God of Abraham is hardly anything. Take seriously, my dear, he cut her off. When you're ready, Mr. Woodbead. Woodbead bowed deeply and quickly began spinning the dials, entering only one number at a time as he moved from top to bottom, alternating between clockwise and counterclockwise turns. Elam gave me a reassuring nod, then turned to lock eyes with the iron face of his ancestor. One by one, the tumblers fell into place, and when Woodbead entered the last digit, we all listened eagerly to see if the lock would either open or reset, but neither happened. Instead, the eyes of Artaxerxes Crow began to glow with the eerie light of the underworld, and we watched in dismay as the iron face moved its bearded mouth to speak. Familiar? The hoarse old voice asked softly in disdain. Impossible. Your soul belongs to the dread Persephone. Too many of us failed to honor the pact you made with Persephone, and our bloodline came to an end, Elam explained after only a moment of dismayed hesitation. But in my last month of life, I befriended a witch, and she renegotiated the pact you made. Thanks to her, my daughter and any other good members of our family were freed from the unfair afterlife that you had condemned us to, and I am now bound to her as her spirit familiar. But dead or not, I am still the only crow who now walks the living earth, and everything in this vault is rightfully mine, so I command you to open. Renegotiated? The face asked, seemingly not caring about much else of what was said. How? What could she possibly have offered Persephone that was worth my entire bloodline? You, Elam replied smugly. She found that perfect corpse of yours you hid in the mausoleum. Persephone was not at all pleased to learn that you had tricked her, and happily, okay, maybe not happily, but willingly took you in exchange for our freedom. You, the real you, is finally where he belongs. The face winced, partially in anger but also in confusion. It seemed that if Artaxerxes had anticipated this outcome, he hadn't prepared for it. If Persephone had his soul, then all was lost and nothing else mattered. What is that thing? Rosalind whispered. A golem. I think, I replied. I don't know what else it could be. A cold iron golem? Genevieve asked skeptically. How is that possible? I don't know. I'm a necromancer, not an alchemist, but Artaxerxes obviously figured out a way, I replied. Extraordinary, Seneca said, his eyes wide with wonder as it dawned on him that the vault itself might actually be worth more than whatever was inside it. To think this has been under my nose all these years. Ah, Samantha, Elam called over his shoulder. I think it's glitching. The face seemed to be shaking now, gently vibrating the walls at a slow but steadily increasing rate. Its chthonic aura intensified, while all other light seemed to vanish, tendrils of ghostly pale ectoplasm leaking from its eyes and lashing out at anything they could reach. Its mouth hung open in a faltering scream, not one of pain or fear or rage, but more simply of need. Like an infant, it instinctively knew that something was wrong, and all it knew to do in that situation was to cry louder and louder until its needs were answered. Have Woodbead reset the lock, that might put it back to sleep, I suggested. Woodbead, You are to do no such thing. This is the closest we've ever come to opening this door, Seneca countered. Elam, you do what you were summoned here to do and make that door stop crying this instant. Ah, Golem, I say again, I am now the last crow upon the living earth, Elam said firmly. Your master forged you to serve his bloodline, so... He screamed in pain as he was ensnared in the golem's ectoplasmic tendrils, crumbling to his knees and his astral form flickering out like a waning ember. Elam! I shouted, starting to bolt into the room before Seneca grabbed me by the shoulder. Don't be foolish, we don't know what that will do to you, he yelled. I appear to be unaffected, sir, though I do kindly request permission to make a timely retreat, Woodbead shouted. Granted, we need to get out of here before this whole building collapses. Seneca agreed. Never mind about Elam. He's a ghost. He'll be fine. You don't know that, and you don't know that Golem will stop after it's destroyed the house, I argued. We can't just run away. We need to put a stop to this. But Samantha, what can we do? Genevieve asked softly, as she gazed upon the enormous cold iron face in helpless horror. I thought for a moment, desperately trying to come up with anything we could do to bring it under control. It's a golem. It needs orders, I said, grabbing hold of the first pen and piece of paper I could find. With Artaxerxes claimed by Persephone, its original orders are moot. It needs new ones. Are you crazy? You can't write golemic script, especially for a golem you know nearly nothing about, Seneca objected. I've read Artaxerxes' journals and the other books he left in the cemetery, I countered, as I frantically scribbled away on the paper. I know a lot of what he knew, and I know a lot about how he thought. I can do this. Are those Sibylline sigils you're drawing? He asked in disbelief. It's a golem. The script needs to be in Hebrew. You said it yourself. A witch swearing by the God of Abraham isn't worth much, I replied, quickly folding up the paper. If it's sacred to me, it will still work. Samantha, what did you write? He demanded. No time, I said as I darted into the room. Seneca tried to come after me, but Genevieve was able to hold him back just long enough for me to make it to the vault. The tendrils of ectoplasm were dense but clustered enough that I could avoid them. The golem was screaming so loud now that it hurt my ears to stand so close to it. The air was vibrating so strongly that I feared that if I simply threw the paper into its mouth it would just be blown backwards, so instead I placed it upon its tongue as swiftly as I could. The instant I drew my hand back, the jaws snapped shut, and the screaming came to a sudden stop. Its glowing eyes locked with mine, and with a single solemn nod I knew that it accepted the new orders it had been given. The chthonic aura dissipated, the face fell still, and the vault door slipped ajar by the tiniest of cracks. Letting out a sigh of relief, I turned to check on Elam. He had demanifested, but I could still sense him through our bond and knew that he wasn't seriously hurt or banished back to the underworld. Seneca rushed straight to the door and tried to pry its mouth open, only to find that it was as if it were all one solid piece of iron. Samantha, what did you tell it to do? He demanded, looking at me as if a favorite pet had decided it liked me more than him. Essentially, I told it that since Artaxerxes had been laid to rest in Harrowick Cemetery, the caretaker of that cemetery would logically be his caretaker as well, and in the absence of a living or otherwise acceptable crow, that caretaker would be who it should answer to, I admitted. That didn't conflict with any of its other instructions, luckily, so it accepted it. And you couldn't have told it to recognize the legal manager of the crow's estate instead? Seneca demanded, angrily enough that Genevieve assumed a defensive position between him and me. Do you really think that Xerxes wouldn't have explicitly told his golem to never accept you as its master? I asked rhetorically. No, I suppose not, he conceded with a defeated sigh, slowly regaining his composure. The vault is open. My end of our bargain is fulfilled. I expect you to keep yours, I said firmly. Of course, he said, as he took in a deep breath and straightened up to his full height. He placed a hand on the vault's handle as if to open it, but then stopped abruptly. Oh dear. This is a bit embarrassing. It seems I've had a small lapse in memory. I actually did come across the documents you were looking for while I was sorting through the filing cabinets in the study." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope of rich, dark brown paper and held it out with a polite smile as I stared at him in utter disbelief. "You unbelievable bastard," I finally shouted. "You had it the whole time." "You made us open this damn vault for you for nothing," Genevieve screamed. "Not for nothing. For this, as we agreed," he replied calmly. "Why should I believe you? How do I know you didn't make that yourself? Or more likely ordered Woodbead to do it?" I demanded. "Now surely a witch of your talents would be able to tell a genuine prophecy from a humble forgery," he replied, proffering the envelope with a small flourish. I snatched it out of his hand and pulled out the folded sheets of torn-out notebook paper inside, reading over the nearly illegible scrawl as quickly as I could. "You lied to us. We deserve to see what's inside that vault," Genevieve yelled. "I did not lie. I had an honest lapse in memory," he lied. "I'm well over 200 years old, you know. These things happen. But I'm afraid our transaction is complete, and quite frankly, you two have worn out your welcome." He snapped at his security guards and whistled for them to escort us out. "Evie, it's fine," I said calmly as I put the paper back into its envelope and slipped it into my satchel. "We got what we came here for. Let's just go." I turned around and took her by the hand, pulling her back out into the front yard. "Dude, you didn't just lie to them, you lied to Ivy. You are going to be in so much shit for this," Rosalind told him as she chased after us, profusely apologizing as she ushered us back to the crossover. Before we stepped into the surveilled vehicle, but were well out of sight of Seneca and his goons, Elam manifested by my side and quickly leaned in to whisper something crucial into my ear.